Welcome to your favorite health program on Ebru TV. You're watching My Doctor Show, and my name is Purity Museo. Now, unsafe food causes more than 200 kinds of diseases, ranging from diarrhea to cancers. About 6 million people globally, which is about 1 in every 20 people, fall ill after eating contaminated food, and 40% of children under the age of 5 will suffer from contaminated food-related conditions, which in most cases is diarrhea. On the show today, we address food poisoning. We will be looking at what food poisoning is, who is at a risk of being poisoned, and also how do you address the symptoms that come with food poisoning. We do have a team of experts to help us with the discussion. Welcome to the show. Call us live with the number that will be displayed right at the bottom of your screen. You can also use the hashtag MyDoctor to speak to us on our social media platform. On Twitter, we are at Ebru TV Kenya, or you can talk to me directly at Purity_Museo. Use our Facebook page as well, Ebru TV Kenya and Purity Museo. For now, I'll ask you to sit back, relax, and learn from the exciting show ahead. And to help us discuss in a little more detail what a food poisoning is and how the problem could be prevented, help me welcome our special guest today, Betty Okero, who is a nutritionist, and also Jen Mugun, marketing manager, Samsung Consumer Electronics. Call us live. The number is 0791478990. We'll also be addressing food poisoning in pregnancy. How do you prevent and how do you go about it in case you are food poisoned during pregnancy? Welcome to the show, ladies. Thank you so much for making time for us. Maybe I could start with you, Betty, by just helping us understand what food poisoning is.
So food poisoning basically refers to a foodborne disease which causes the body to have a different reaction from what it is used to. It could range from stomach upsets, it could range from fevers, diarrhea and vomiting. And usually this is because somebody has ingested food or a drink that has got some bacteria, virus or parasites. And in other words, contaminated food.
Contaminated food.
Yes.
And you'll be helping us because when someone says, I've had some food poison, then there is a myth that is usually associated with it that, you know, someone wants to get rid of that person. So you'll just be helping us understand what are some of the possible causes for food poisoning. But just before that, Betty, maybe how do we address, what would you say the burden of food poisoning in the country right now is like?
So food poisoning really does not refer to somebody trying to put poison in your food. But as long as you take in contaminated food that has got bacteria that your body doesn't need, or it has got a parasite or viruses that your body does not need, then it will cause a very unfamiliar and uncomfortable reaction in your body. So your body is trying to fight that foreign body that has entered into it. And yes, so many times we've had reports of people saying that food places are not very clean, and you know, they want to close up areas because there's a break out of cholera, you know, or people have a lot of diarrhea, especially in under 5. It is in how food is handled. If somebody is going to handle food with dirty hands, then there is a possibility that you're going to transfer the bacteria from your hands and to that food. And even though everybody can actually get food poisoning, if you have a low immunity, then you're at a higher risk than somebody else whose immunity is better. So we are talking also about children, because children, their immunity might not be as strong as we'd expect that of an adult to be. So children would be at risk. We're talking about sick people. If you're already sick, then your immunity is not functioning the way we want it. So you're more likely to get food poisoning. Or if you're talking about a pregnant woman, you know, their body is fighting so many other hormones, and the priority for the body at that particular moment is to try and take care of this human being that is growing in the womb, and not necessarily the mother. So they're at a higher risk of food poisoning. And it doesn't have to happen outside in the public. It can actually happen in your house. Yes.
All right. We'll be looking at different types for food poisoning. But Jen, once again, welcome to the show. Let's talk about the storage of food poisoning, because Betty is saying it doesn't have anything to do with someone putting poison into your food. So let's relate food poisoning and storage of food.
Yes.
You know, how long, what is food storage? How long should you store your food before you could eat that food? And after how long do you say this food is not right to eat?
Yes, absolutely. As Betty has mentioned, food poisoning is not necessarily having somebody put poison or chemical in your food. Coming to refrigerators, if you don't follow the prescribed or best practice in terms of storage of food in your refrigerator, then you're likely to get food poisoning. And how is this? When you're storing food in your refrigerator, you need to be careful how you do it. You need to store your food in containers that do not allow for leakages, or even foil paper or cling that does not have leakages. Because what happens when you store food and there's leakages to other foods, then you're likely to get food poisoning. And as we say, your family is the most important. So it's important for you to store your food in the right way in the refrigerator to avoid leakages or contamination with other food, therefore causing food poisoning. In terms of storing food in your refrigerator, we normally encourage, once you cook your food, store your food within 2 hours in the refrigerator, because beyond 2 hours, then now bacteria starts becoming active. So normally it is recommended, best practice world over, that you store your food within 2 hours. Again, don't store your food when it's very hot. Yeah, you should allow your food to cool down before you put it in the refrigerator. So have your food cool down. And if the food is very hot, we normally recommend you can put it in hollow containers to allow it to cool down faster. And thereafter, it's recommended that you should not keep food for more than 4 days in the refrigerator. Yeah, 4 days is what is recommended. Beyond that, you'll have bacteria accumulating in your refrigerator.
Okay. Betty, take us through different types of food poisoning.
So depending on the origin, one of the most common that usually may affect children and pregnant women is botulism, which you've had people say that we should not give honey to children who are below the age of 6 months and all that. And basically this is from botulium, which comes from the spores that you either find in dust or you find them in vegetables, or you can also find them in honey. So if somebody ingests that and the spores are there, they might actually get food poisoning. But there's also food poisoning that you get from home when you, like she mentioned before, from how we store our food, okay? So let's say you store something like eggs or your milk at the fridge door, and you want it to stay there for so long. Whenever you open that fridge door, you end up with a different temperature from what you intending to have for the food to stay safe. So when we do that for so long, and you know that milk takes a very long time, and you ingest that, you're more likely to have accumulated bacteria, because bacteria will be comfortable at a certain temperature. So when you keep changing the temperature, it mutates itself and wants to really exist in that food. Or then you mix your chopping boards. You know, what you use for meat is what you use for your vegetables. That cross contamination can actually lead to food poisoning. Or then you decide to eat meat that is starting to go bad, but you're thinking you spent so much money to buy it and you don't want to throw it away. That also can lead to food poisoning. Or then you have come from the washroom to help yourself from the toilet, and you haven't washed your hands clean, okay? Or you're touching meat, you haven't washed your hands, you're going to, you know, to touch another food. Or when we are feeding babies, how are we washing the utensils that the babies use? Are we even disinfecting them? So if you're not doing all those things, then those would be some of the sources and then the types, or the ways that would get food poisoning.
And just before we look at the signs and symptoms for food poisoning, you've mentioned that the babies under the age of 5, they are more or at a higher risk of getting food poisoned. You've mentioned immunity, which we all agree. But now someone may be asking, so what exactly should I be, apart from considering your hygiene, what exactly should I be giving my baby, especially just after weaning, after 6 months? What should I introduce my child to just ensure that we reduce the number of cases for diarrhea that we see for children, especially under the age of 5 or 1 year?
So it could be two things. It could be maybe the way we have introduced food, we've given too much that the body is not able to accommodate. And so we might not really call that food poisoning, but we need weaning or trying to introduce complementary feeding should be a very progressive kind of behavior. You do not wake up and your child is 6 months and you want to give them everything that exists on earth, or you want to give them one particular type of food. So it is very progressive, and the advice usually to mothers and the parents of these babies and their caregivers is at that point, then sit down with a professional to be able to take you through the process. Again, it depends. One size does not fit all. So for the public use, we cannot, be very specific and say, eat this. What if they don't eat it in their community? But start with very simple foods, very simple staples. And remember, for a child, you want to give higher energy requirements because their cells are growing so fast and they need that for growth and development. Of course, and the other things will follow. So immunity, basically, look at a child who's 6 months. That's the time they're trying to sit down. They're trying to crawl around. They're touching things around them. So if cleanliness is not there and food is not handled properly, then they might actually get a lot of bacteria into their system. And even on their own, as they touch surfaces and put things in their mouth, that puts them at a risk. So it does not have to necessarily be straight linked to food, but what they do around the house. So cleanliness is key. Ensuring that the immunity of the child is maintained at some level. And even if we maintain it, remember the immunity of the child will not be as perfect as that of an adult.
Yeah.
So if we maintain it, we just try and make sure that if there is a disease, the child is treated for it and in a timely manner so that they don't fall sick so often. Okay, and if they do, it is treated promptly.
Okay, and Jen, there is a myth that some people will not take food that has been stored in a fridge because they believe it's not good food. Earlier on, you mentioned that you have to store your food within 2 hours, and also it has to it should not be hot. So let's address some of the myths and misconceptions about food storage. What other types of food storage do we have other than refrigerator, and which ones are the most recommended?
Maybe just to reiterate what Betty has said and just to mention, in terms of storing your food, the way the food stays healthy or the way the food, you store your food in your in your fridge is actually something basic requirement for you so that you can be able to consume your food in the right manner and it doesn't go bad. One of the things that I must say as a practice you must do is maintain the correct temperature of your fridge. When you're storing food in your fridge, ensure that the degree is at 4 degrees. And if you're storing in the refrigerator, it should be minus 18 degrees to allow your food to stay frozen for longer. So those are just the basics, and that's within the control of you as the consumer. So if you follow those guidelines, and as she mentioned, and this is best practice, don't store some of, like milk, don't store your milk on the door of the refrigerator. And anyway, it is not designed for that, because once you open, you get moisture coming in, and which can actually push the degree of your fridge up in a very short time, as a minute. So ensure that your door stays closed, ensure that you maintain the right temperature, that is 4 degrees for the fridge and negative 18 degrees for the freezer. So if you don't follow that, then of course it's expected that your food will get contaminated and you'll get diseases. So as a practice, that you must do. One thing I must say that we are doing at Samsung, in our refrigerators we have what we call a deodorizer. And what the deodorizer does, it actually helps to sanitize your refrigerator and hence trapping bacteria, ensuring that your food stays longer. And you must ask, okay, fine, what happens with the deodorizer filter? If they run out, it's actually replaceable. So that's one of the modern technology that we have tried to adopt in our refrigerators to avoid having bacteria and to keep our consumers safe.
So much to learn about the storage of food, but we'll be getting back to that. Betty, take us through some of the simple signs and symptoms for food poisoning.
So they're never really very clear, but one of the most common ones that we see would be vomiting. There would be some diarrhea or loose stool. We'd also have fevers and chills for some people, a general feeling of malaise or body weakness. Yeah, and if it becomes so bad, then the fever could be so high that the person would have to be admitted in hospital. And in very rare but very extreme cases, then you would have dehydration. Because remember, when there is there's vomiting and diarrhea, you're losing so much water. So that if that is not being replaced, you can end up with dehydration. And I know we've had, like, when people have extreme cases of food poisoning, they've actually succumbed. Because then if we have dehydration, then your kidneys will not function properly, and all the other organs in your body, and they could actually shut down. Yeah, so those are some of the common symptoms that you'd expect. And also, as we're looking at how fast do you notice that then I have food poisoning? if after eating, you know, when you finish eating, you should have a very comfortable feeling. You should be okay. Well, and until maybe you've overeaten and then there is indigestion.
Yeah.
But you should be very comfortable and feeling good about yourself. So if I have finished eating and within maybe 20 to 30 minutes, my stomach feels like it's rumbling, or I feel like my stomach is almost, you know, I have a stomach upset. It seems like you're going to have diarrhea and something like that, or you have nausea after eating, then you want to question yourself, what was wrong with the food that I ate? You want to question the preparation, the production process of that this food went through before you managed to consume it. Because if you're not sick before and after the sickness, 20 or so minutes later, you have it, then you would want to question that. But sometimes it can take longer than that. It can take a day or two for you to notice it. Though for some foods like the fish, the chicken, the meat, the poisoning would be much faster. So you'd notice it in your body much faster. If you're not sure of the symptoms, if you're relating the symptoms to anything else but food poisoning, again, just go to hospital and check with the doctor, okay? Ideally, those symptoms should be able to tell us what is happening. If we go to hospital and we're not able to place it, that you're having food poisoning or something else that would display the same symptoms, then we'd probably run a stool test, stool culture test, to just determine if we can see the parasites or the bacteria in that stool and determine what it is and how to treat it, or also blood tests to see if the infection that you have has gotten into the bloodstream, because if it does, then you have to be under such heavy treatment to try and clear it, because that can be very dangerous to the body.
And the symptoms for food poisoning, the common symptom is diarrhea, which is also a symptom for cholera. So how do you get to differentiate between the symptoms for cholera, which is diarrhea, the same diarrhea, to the symptoms of just food poison?
So for food poisoning, it might not be to the extreme. You'd have the nausea, the vomiting, and the diarrhea, but it would not be to the extreme. But the one for cholera, it would be so extreme that if we take an hour or two before we get you to hospital, you would not even have the energy to do it. So the first, because at home you're not able to distinguish that, and sometimes you actually need those tests to see that, you know, this is what is happening. And for diarrhea, in most cases, you'll probably even have the fever setting in very fast, faster than they would set in food poisoning. So because of that confusion, the safest way always, if somebody is having diarrhea and vomiting, and within 30 minutes you're not able to stop it, and it is continuing, you know, the frequency of the diarrhea is very fast, then you would want to run to hospital so that you don't second guess it.
Yeah, and we have Jacinta from Kasarani online. Hello, Jacinta.
Hello, how are you?
I'm okay, and you?
I'm not good at all.
Yeah, you had a concern?
I was actually when I woke up and find the conversation of the doctor.
All right, thank you.
I heard her talking about the food poison.
That's right.
So I took some food yesterday, the day before yesterday.
Just reduce the volume of your television set. We can't get you clearly. Jacinta, just reduce the volume of your TV.
Okay, a minute.
Okay, go ahead now.
I'm not feeling well in my stomach.
All right.
After taking the food, I just started a pain. But she vomit.
Okay.
So I need the solution because I went to the hospital. They gave me the painkiller, but it's still hurting.
Okay.
So what can I do?
All right. Thank you so much for your concern. Betty, Jacinta is asking, she ate some food a day after yesterday, and she's, I think, having stomach upset. She's gone to the hospital. She's gotten some painkillers, but the problem still persists. What could be the problem, and how can she address it?
So my advice to Jacinta would be, although we have mentioned some of these symptoms of food poisoning, you don't have to get all of them, and they don't have to be the same. We would have eaten the same food. I react, you don't react. Again, how is my defense system in the body different from yours? That would dictate that. And if she went to hospital, she was given painkillers and the pain doesn't seem to relieve, then it is time to go back and probably request for further tests to try and determine really what the problem is, instead of trying to stay at home and hoping against all hopes that it will resolve. Meanwhile, if there is diarrhea, I didn't hear her say that, but
yeah, she said there's no diarrhea.
There's no diarrhea, it's just cramps. Yeah, so she would have to go back to hospital to just try and determine the exact cause of the stomach cramps or the stomach pains. That would be the safest. And she says she ate the food from home. The other thing that is very common in our houses is that we want to thaw our food on, you get it from the freezer and you put it on the surface at room temperature. I don't think, and she will be able to explain to us that I don't think that's the right way to do it, because the temperature at where you're getting it from the freezer to what you're using at room temperature might actually encourage growth of bacteria. And by the time you're getting ready to cook that food, it would be so full of bacteria that would defeat your body's defense system. Or you get your food from the freezer, you have thawed it, you have cooked it, and then you want to refreeze it. And that's why you're encouraged, whatever you're going to store what if you remove, you do not feel the urge to want to put it back. Put it in small containers so that whatever you remove is a serving that would be able to fit all of you and you finish it. Otherwise, then you're safer throwing it than trying to eat it again and causing you so much harm.
Okay, and that brings us to Jane. Jane, tell us how to use a refrigerator, really. It's one of the methods of preserving your food, but what she's mentioned, most people do that. You store your food, you remove the food, just a small portion, and then you return the food. How do you use a refrigerator? And also try to address the issue of maintaining the temperature. Some of the refrigerators, you just buy and use it. Many people are not aware about maintaining the temperatures and how important it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think just by the basics alone, as I mentioned, you should ensure that first and foremost you clean your fridge at least once a week, because you need to sanitize your fridge from spillages or cross-contamination from other foods. So as a basic, ensure that you clean your fridge weekly. And over and above that,
just normally,
you can use hot water, or you can use some food-based kind of substances like vinegar. You'll be surprised. Vinegar is actually ideal and recommended to clean your fridge, or you can use baking soda, or you can use lemon. All these substances are actually safe for your food. So even though you clean your refrigerator, and those substances remain, they're actually safe for human consumption. And what that does, it kills any bacteria. So as a standard, you must maintain a basic hygiene when you're using your refrigerator. Number two, do not store food in big portions in your freezer, because what happens, store only what you're going to consume for that particular moment. So develop the culture and the habit of storing your foods into the portions that actually fit your cooking for that moment. Like, for example, if you're storing meat, don't store big portions of meat. Store smaller portions, so once you remove it from the freezer and you thaw it, you actually consume it there and there. You do not have it thaw and leave it out and then put it back in the refrigerator. That's a recipe for disaster, because you're going to get food poisoning. Something else that I must say, with modern technology, and that's something Samsung has adopted, we have what we call twin cooling in our refrigerators. And what that does, it helps you have smart conversion. For example, if you're going on holiday, and you want to save your food for longer, you can do vacation mode, where you convert your actually fridge into a freezer. So even when you come back, your food is safe for consumption. Or if you have a lot of food in the fridge, you can actually convert that and have just the fridge functioning alone. Or you can have the normal, where you have the fridge and the freezer. So all those various options are there to be able to preserve your food longer. Something else I must say, once you store your food in the freezer, don't keep it for too long. It's normally recommended about 2 to 3 months maximum to put your food in the freezer. However, we keep saying, once you remove your food from the freezer, if you've stored it for that long.
So for the freezer, you can go for months?
2 to 3 months.
But for the fridge itself,
it's 4 days.
4 days.
And also maintain the right temperatures of 4 degrees on the fridge and -18 for the freezer.
All right. Allow me to cut you short. We have someone online. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Hi.
Hi. Hi.
I'm great. And you?
I'm good.
You have a question?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
My question is,
I can see lots of people like cooking food like this, and they put it in the freezer for 1 month. Is that food poison or not?
Okay, I think it's just what you are addressing. She's asking, she's put food in a freezer for a month. Is that okay?
That's okay. As long as the right temperature is maintained, it is absolutely fine for human consumption and it's safe.
Let's talk about the right temperature. Once you have your fridge, we have the freezer part of it. Is that what? Because there are some people who, there are some freezers which we just buy as freezers, and some fridge we buy with freezer. So is there a difference, or
Yes.
it's one and the same thing?
There's normally a difference. All refrigerators nowadays come with a compartment for freezer and for fridge. And normally, more often than not, you'll notice the freezer is normally maybe much smaller than the fridge. Or if you're going for the high-end premium, then you'll see there's a clear separation where we call side by side. You have this side as the freezer and this side at the fridge. So that is commonly, and even if you look at the manual, that is very well stipulated. So that way you're not in doubt in terms of what is the freezer and what is the fridge, and in terms of how to store and what's the right temperature. So that is clearly stipulated in the user manual.
Okay. And Betty, you highlighted some of the signs and symptoms for food poisoning. But now, and then you are very categorical, distinguishing between the food poisoning symptoms and that of some conditions with almost similar signs and symptoms. But now, after how long should you see a doctor? Or do we have prolonged, or do we have some, what are some of the complications, long-term complications that may come with food poisoning?
Ideally, if I'm experiencing signs and symptoms of what might seem like food poisoning, and maybe about half an hour later it is worsening than it is trying to resolve, then I would actually want to go to hospital and have that sorted. But like we said, if we have extreme dehydration, then we are risking our organs shutting down. So even as this is happening and you're trying to make your way to hospital, you want to keep rehydrating. And you see for children if they can't keep anything down, or even adults, if you can't keep anything down, then that is not the time to try and start eating your solid foods and all that. Once the problem is resolved, you'll have all this time to eat. So basically, you just want to keep sipping on some liquids to keep you hydrated. But what I will insist on is try and make your way to hospital. You're safer getting there, and we give you painkillers, or we just tell you, you know what, this has resolved, it hasn't really gone so much, but let's manage it. If it is a pregnant woman, for example, and they have food poisoning that is not taken care of, they risk a miscarriage in very extreme cases. They also risk stillbirths, or then the mother would be so sick that they have to be hospitalized for a very long time. Okay, so nobody wants such things. If you're talking about botulism, then somebody might also risk paralysis, or then if it is cholera and you're in an extreme case and you're dehydrated and your organs have shut down, then that's absolute death. So you don't want to get to those extremes. Once you notice any signs and symptoms, just take yourself to hospital. And you can always actually tell, is it just indigestion or something like that? If it is indigestion, or it is very mild food poisoning, maybe what you ate was not in very large amounts, or the bacteria that you've consumed is not so high in quantity, then you'd want to start some home remedies. Just drink some water. Drink some water that maybe has ginger, has lemon, has chamomile. Some of these foods actually help to relax the muscles in the stomach and prevent the spasms, okay? And if then you're not able to eat, and you're starting your foods, again, that is not the time to go for your greasy, oily, sweet foods, That's not the time to go for your milk, for example, because it might aggravate the diarrhea.
Okay.
So I said milk, not yogurt. Yeah? So there's
there's
a difference.
We'll be having a look at some of the home remedies for food poisoning treatment options. That's when we come back. Talk to us. The number to use to call us live is 0791478990. The hashtag My Doctor on Twitter at Ebru TV Kenya at Purity_Museo. My Doctor Show continues in a moment.
It's cold today. Why is it cold? Yeah. It is cold today.
Because it's a large place. Welcome back to the second and the last part of the show. You're watching My Doctor Show. Just in case you're joining us for the very first time, our topic of discussion today is food poisoning. We are addressing how do we preserve our food, and even how do we use a refrigerator. Call us live. The number is 0791 478 990. We do have Betty and Jen just helping us with the discussion. But just before we could get into it, let's have a look at the home remedies first. Welcome back to the show. Call us live. The number is 0791 478 990. Betty and Jen, welcome back to the second part of the show. Thank you so much for staying with us. We are still talking matters food poisoning. Let's get back to you, Jen. You talked about, let's help us understand on food preservation. Let's get back there. You said you store your food within 2 hours. If it's in the freezer, then it could go between 1 to 3 months. That's what you said. But now, how do you first store your food? Is there a pattern of food storage? For example, you have githeri, you do have meat, you have pork, you have fish. Is there a pattern of storing them, or do you just put them together?
Well, I will not say there's a prescribed pattern, but the basics is this. How do you store your food prior to putting it in the fridge? You must store in containers that don't leak, such that there's no contamination or fluids. Like, for example, if you put meat in those papers that you buy from the supermarket, of course you'll expect that there'll be some leakages into your other food. So you can imagine that liquid is seeping into your githeri, into your all these other foods. Then that's actually a recipe for disaster. So the basics in terms of storing your food is in the how. Make sure you have none containers that are leaking, or you wrap tightly such that you're avoiding food leakages from one to another. Something else that you must do to ensure that actually your food is stored correctly is ensure, as I said, the door is locked, and also always look at the rubber seal along the door. Ensure that you check that regularly, and in case there is anything loose or anything that needs to be, you need to replace that, because once that is not replaced properly, then you don't have the right temperatures in your freezer and your fridge. So that's as a standard, something we as consumers forget to check. So ensure that you check the rubber door of your fridge so that you avoid air coming into your freezer and spoiling the temperature, and then you don't store your food with the recommended temperature. So those are just the basics that as consumers we need to observe to avoid food poisoning.
And does every refrigerator have the recommended temperatures that you are talking about, or is it manually regulated?
No, it is standard.
Okay.
Yeah, once you set at 18 for the freezer and at 4 degrees for the fridge, it's actually standard. But in the opening and closing, if you open the door for too long, for example, if it's at 4 degrees, it's actually easy for it to rise up. So open the door when necessary and don't leave the doors open. Yes, that way you encourage your food to stay at the right temperature.
And you've talked about the containers, but there are people who just store their food using the polythene papers. Can you just to ensure, as long as it's not leaking, can you use the papers to store your food?
Yes, there's some papers that are recommended, and if you're buying in the supermarket, it's actually written, recommended for fridge users. So it's not just any paper. And especially those papers that we buy from the butchery, those are not recommended. So there are those papers that are actually recommended for food to be for storage in the refrigerator. So when you're buying that, you must look out for that in the supermarket so that you store your food correctly. Containers, it's straightforward. Non-leaking containers, and normally they'll have...
The containers should be covered, because they're people
should be covered.
Just, all right.
That's another mistake consumers make, and it's something I must demystify. When you're storing food in the refrigerator, or in the freezer, whichever. You must ensure that you close it properly, because what happens if you don't close your containers, then one, if it's in the fridge, you don't correct the moisture of the food disappears, and it's actually very easy to get contamination, because you're having spillages and spoils moving and cross-contamination. So always ensure that your food is well sealed, whether it's the polythene bags or the container. That way you avoid food poisoning, and you avoid bacteria moving from food to another and causing
Right. And let's now hear
poisoning.
from Grace. Hello, Grace. Grace, hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great, and you?
I'm okay.
Talk to us.
My name, okay. My question is about the fridge.
Okay.
Some people say the two-door. There is the two-door and the one-door fridge.
Yeah.
Some people say the one-door is better than the two-door. So is it true? And also, there is this fridge, antibacterial fridge. What is the difference between the normal fridge and the antibacterial fridge?
All right.
Yeah.
I thought, Jen, you've heard her clearly.
Yes.
The one-door and the two-door fridge, and also the antibacterial fridge.
Okay. Well, what I must say, it's actually sometimes a matter of preference. But with modern technology, you'll see as there's what we call the entry level fridge, and then you go all the way to the premium. Normally, the smaller fridges, which are actually maybe for the lower end consumer, you'll find sometimes they just have a one door. But as you progress, and as a consumer, you go through your consumer journey, then you'll want to progress and go for a two-door. So either way, the fridge will still function as normal. It's more of a matter of preference and style, because if you go for the two-door, then it ensures you have more space down here for your fridge, and then you have
So it's
your
not
freezer.
a matter of
So it's not a matter
door
one
is
is better than the other. No. It's actually just a matter of preference, but it will still function at the as recommended.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of preference. Yeah.
And Betty, now take us through diagnosis and also treatment options for food poisoning.
So depending on what the doctors will actually find out, if they find out it's just normal food poisoning, and to what levels has it gotten to the bloodstream and all that, will dictate what they will use. So of course there'll be some painkillers just for managing the pain and maybe the abscess that would be there. If it warrants that the bacterial infection will require antibiotics to treat it, or if they have done the stool cultures and have determined which type of bacteria is there and which antibiotic will actually help to kill that bacteria, then the doctors will be able to do that. If then maybe the infection has gone to the blood, and the easiest way to try and clear it out of the blood would be through IV and antibiotic administration, again they will do that. So it is what the doctors have found out versus what is the best treatment to give the best relief and to clear the infection as much as it can be cleared. So yeah, it's not one size fits all, so it will depend with whatever they have found. Of course, if it is cholera, again they will do they'll give the patient the right treatment for cholera.
Yeah, and is there a way you can find out, you said that there's a way you can tell that you are having food poisoning, but what are some of the foods, because you had also mentioned that you should not go for milk when you're having a stomach upset. What are some of the bad eating habits, or what are some of the foods that you should stay away from when you're having food poisoning? Yeah.
So if there's diarrhea and vomiting and you can simply not keep anything down, again, as I said, try to replenish with fluids as much as you can. Like, you know what we do for the children, oral rehydration salts, so that, you know, as you're losing the water, you're also losing it with some electrolytes or salts in your body, which are very important for balancing of fluids and ensuring that your body system continues functioning properly. So you would want to do that. Maybe you just want to put some little salt and sugar in your water and try and drink that. You can make your own ORS at home and try give the baby or drink it if you're the one who's affected, and keep replenishing that. You'd also want, if you're able to eat something little, maybe you're in the process of recovering from the food poisoning, then something we call a brat diet. Basically, you're talking about a banana because of the potential of the it's a bland food, sort of, and it has the potential to relax your muscles so that the upsets don't aggravate. Then we have rice. Again, rice has a very bland taste. Yeah, so it is easy to keep it down. It's not very salty and all that. You just want to boil it so that you don't add the oil, which would aggravate what do you call it, the diarrhea or the nausea. Then there is applesauce. Okay, not very common in this country, but yes, you can use that. And then there is toast. Yeah, just your normal bread, and you know, just put it in, you can toast it so that it's a bit dry, and you eat it. That will help you not to have frequent vomiting and all that. What you notice about these foods, they are quite low in fiber. Because if we increase, we've mentioned again before in this show that fiber increases, you know, how waste is cleaned out of our system and all that. So you're not going to have diarrhea and go for the or foods that are high in fiber, because it will increase the frequency. So they're very low in fiber. They also have a very blunt taste. And don't put large portions, just small portions. When I mentioned milk, that milk would actually destabilize you and probably increase the diarrhea frequency. You can use low-fat, natural, or what we call plain yogurt, or other people would want to call it Greek yogurt, because it has live culture, or what we call live bacteria. And when we consume that, the body is able to try and balance between the bacteria that has affected the system versus this live bacteria, and try to bring, you know, an understanding between the two of them and relieve the symptoms. So the milk would actually worsen it because it lacks the probiotics, but the natural low-fat yogurt will do that. And why low-fat? We're trying to reduce the amount of fat that you're consuming so that you don't aggravate the nausea. When you have vomiting, nausea, and diarrhea, then when you see fatty foods, or when you consume fatty, sugary foods, you'll get nauseated. When you consume large chunks of food or in big portions, again, it will aggravate all the symptoms that you're having. You could also try to just take in your lemon ginger water, okay, hoping that the acid from the lemon can actually increase the amount of hydrochloric acid in your stomach to help with the digestion of maybe the excess starch that you had, if it was indigestion that caused that. Or as the acid is being produced, it would also help in fighting the bacteria that is in the stomach.
Yeah, and let's continue with the same discussion on, let's get to the home remedies. When, for example, you realize you've consumed some food and it's not going well with your stomach, is there some home remedies that you can do to just prevent the vomiting and the diarrhea?
So we already mentioned the ginger.
Yeah.
You can use that. We already mentioned the lemon slices. You can also do carrot juice with some peppermint on it. And you can also just take your peppermint, crush it, put it in your water, hot water, try and drink that. You can also try and get a little apple cider vinegar, you know, put it in water and try to drink it. We are just trying to improve the internal environment of your stomach to try and either flush out the bacteria or try and give a neutral environment where now the bacterial growth from the bad bacteria that you've ingested would not be promoted. Yes.
Okay. And now, Jen, I will engage you. We talked about the storage of food, how you're supposed to store, but now for baby food, is there a way, is there a unique way? Should you mix it? When you are storing, you say there's no pattern, but the basics is that you just ensure the containers are not leaking. But now storage for baby food, especially the baby milk, you know, is there a way we can store, is there a special way to store baby food to begin with?
Yeah. And, you know, babies are quite sensitive in terms of their immune system and all. So normally it's recommended, if you're storing food, if you're storing milk or food for the baby, at least separate, have a clear demarcation between your food for normal, for everybody else in the family, and the food for the baby. You're just taking extra caution, because these are young babies who, as mentioned, I mean, the immunity system is quite low at that moment. So it's important to have actually a clear demarcation, because that way you avoid. And as I'm saying, you must have proper storage. But even over and above that, it's just good to be extra cautious that if you're storing the baby food, maybe you can have it on the lower compartment of the freezer, and then you have the upper compartment for your normal food. It's just good to take that extra caution. Yeah.
And Betty, some studies have showed that freezing the baby milk is the greatest contributor to diarrhea for children. First, is that true? And how are you supposed to go about it?
So if you're talking about milk, and remember, you can store your food very well in the freezer or in the fridge. But when you remove it, before the baby consumes it, there are processes in between. So that would be, we would be here blaming the fridge or the freezer, but how the food is handled by the time the baby is eating it could be the problem. Like breast milk, we're now encouraging women to do exclusive breastfeeding, and women are working. So after 3 months, they actually have to go back to the office, and they don't have 24 hours to breastfeed their babies. And we tell them express the milk and store it. So if they have to do that, then the containers must be very clean and sanitized, okay? And each container would only accommodate what the baby would be able to drink as a feed. So, get a small milk storage containers that would, so you're not going to store a liter of breast milk, and because a baby will not be able to finish that. You'd rather store them in very small containers, maybe 120 or 180 mils, so that if the baby consumes that, whatever is left is discarded. Okay, and then label it so that you know what did I keep fast, because it is fast in. Sorry, what you keep fast is what you remove fast. Fast in, fast out. You don't store milk today and one you stored last week and you pick this one for today and you leave the one for last week. Okay, you want everything to go by the date. So it is as strict as labeling what was put at what date and at what time. Remove it, put it in the fridge so that it thaws, and then when it is warmed and the baby drinks it and leaves it, it must be discarded. Okay, same to when you do the baby formula. Okay, put what the baby will be able to consume, and if they are not able to consume and within two hours they have not consumed it, then it has to be thrown away. So then the person taking care of...
Even when it's kept in the freezer, after 2 hours, if it's not consumed?
We don't even recommend that you keep baby formula in the freezer.
Right.
Mix and let the baby be ready to take it, okay? Because again, it will gather bacteria, and this child does not have the immunity that an adult has, okay? So then, if we want to save, you either get a helper or a caregiver who will be able to stick by those rules, okay? Otherwise, then you will be trying to save money by saying, I will not discard this milk. Then you hurt your baby. You could lose the baby in the process.
Yeah, and the expressed milk, you mentioned that you put into small portions. So how long should it stay in the freezer?
It would still stay those 3 to 6 months,
okay.
But what you remove is put in the fridge at night, so that in the morning it is ready to use, and you pick what is needed for the baby, thaw it correctly or warm it for the baby, and give the baby. So you're not removing it from the freezer and then you notice the baby is very hungry and you try and microwave it or things like that. No, your baby consumes this amount of milk within these hours. Remove it at night, put it in the refrigerator, so that it can be in liquid form by the time you want to use it the next day. And then warm the one you need, the baby consumes it, and you wait for the next one.
Yeah, and we have Fatma from Nakuru. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, hi.
Hi.
You have a concern? Hello.
Yeah, nauliza hivi. Hello, madam.
Uliza, nakupata.
Habari zenu?
Mzuri sana.
Nasema hivi. Tunaweza kustore chakula kwa plastic containers.
Naomba upunguze sauti ya TV yako. Ndio tukupate vizuri, alafu uendelee. Hello, Fatma. Endelea, nakupata.
Haya.
Asante. She's asking whether it's good to store food in plastic containers.
It's absolutely allowable and absolutely correct, as long as I've kept on mentioning in the show, as long as there's no leakage. Those containers should actually be properly sealed to avoid any leakage, and you should always store food when you put it in the fridge or the freezer. It must be completely closed to avoid moisture getting out of the food, and that actually overworks your refrigerator, the compressor, and of course high bills and all. So you make sure that when you're storing, you follow the right prescribed format as best practice.
Yeah, and let's talk about the bills for using a fridge. Should you keep the fridge functioning 24/7, or at some point can you just put it off to just, you know, spare the bills?
That's something I must demystify as well. And as mentioned earlier in the show, I mentioned that at Samsung we have new technology which we call twin cooling. And what twin cooling does and allows you as a consumer to do is to utilize your fridge effectively, which in turn also saves you quite a bit of money in terms of power. I mentioned, like, for example, if you're going on vacation, yeah, you can actually put vacation mode, and that way you only have the freezer functioning. For example, let's say you don't have too much food in the freezer, yeah, you can actually change that format and have the fridge alone, and that's what we call power saving. So with modern technology, we have new, what we call Samsung twin cooling format, which allows you to use your fridge as desired. You might want to use the freezer and fridge, which is normal. You might want to use vacation. You might want to use only the lower part and save you, and that's what we call power saving. So yes, there with Samsung fridge, there are various conversion formats that you can use and actually save you power as well.
And what happens, Jen, when there is a power blackout? You know, just all of a sudden there's power blackout for an hour, even the whole day. Should you just pick the food and throw it away, or is there a way you can reutilize the food? But just before you answer the question, we do have Eunice online. Hello, Eunice.
Hello, how are you guys?
We are great, and you?
I'm fine.
Go ahead with your concern.
I'm asking about the EBM, the express breast milk. Are you supposed to warm it, like, at what temperature are you supposed to warm it? Because is it supposed to be warm like any other milk, or there is a certain temperature which you could warm it? Because maybe it's not as natural as the milk we have. Yes.
Thank you so much, especially after freezing it. Are you supposed to warm it or even heat it until it boils?
So whenever mothers pose that question to me, what I tell them is if there's still milk, and when we are teaching them how to do the expressing of the milk, we ask them to express it at the back of their hand, yeah? So that they can actually internalize what kind of temperature that the breast milk comes in. And you'll notice it is barely lukewarm, okay? It is not as hot as our normal milk, okay? So you want to keep it at that temperature. And that's why I said when you get it from the freezer, you put it in the fridge so that it can be in liquid form. If I put it in my water, normal hot water, for a few minutes and try to test the temperature at the back of my hand, I'll notice the lukewarmness, and that is what the baby needs. So again, you're not going to, you know, overboil it. It is not meant for that. In fact, we are doing exclusive breastfeeding because naturally we're not able to stay home for 24 hours with this baby to give them the same breast milk.
Okay.
So it is not heating, it is just warming. But you can't do that if you have removed it from the freezer to that water, because you will not know if all the milk has actually warmed. Yes.
Okay. And Jen, once you've stored your food in the refrigerator, how are you supposed now to use it in terms of warming it? Are you supposed to? Some people use a microwave. Do you heat that food completely, or you just warm it like she's talking about for breast milk?
It's actually a matter of preference. What normally happens, if your food that's frozen in the freezer, you can actually put it on the fridge area, and then it will actually thaw to the desired level that you want to cook. You could also use a microwave. But if you use a microwave, then again you must consume that food at that moment, because if you use a microwave and then put the food back into the fridge, then you're encouraging bacteria. So if you use a microwave, it's actually safe, but you must consume it there and then. You can also put it at the fridge where we have normal room temperature, and your food will actually thaw. So either is safe, but it's just the technique, or rather the practice that you use. Ensure that you actually cook it immediately and cook the food. I mean, if you're putting food in the fridge, as mentioned, you must put it 2 hours after you've cooked the food. And again, don't put hot food in the refrigerator. You're going to encourage bacteria because you're putting it in the wrong temperature. So it's actually just a matter of handling. Yeah.
Okay, and Betty, I'll ask you in 10 seconds. Just leave us with some few tips on how to ensure food safety.
So just the food handling has to be it has to be done in a very hygienic manner. All hands must be cleaned after visiting the toilet, after touching a different kind of food, after changing the baby's diapers. Just ensure that your hands are clean, the surface where you're using is cleaned, and separate your food. And for pregnant women, don't go for the raw foods. That's not your time to go for sushi and shellfish and you know, raw eggs, because I don't know what does it do to your health. Just, you know, maintain the utmost hygiene that you can.
All right. Thank you so much, Betty Okero and Jen Mugun. We do appreciate that's all the time we had for the show. We would have wished to continue, but that's the time. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your contribution, your comments. We highly appreciate. You can always download our previous episodes from our YouTube channel. Just go to Ebru TV Kenya or Purity Museo and choose the episode of your choice. The show continues tomorrow, same place, same time. I'm Purity Museo. Bye-bye for now.